2 weeks ago, Harold was up here and he introduced and began a 4-week series for us on the doctrine of the atonement. Now, for those of you who are here, he gave us a wonderful definition of the atonement and gave us some background. Today, what I'd like to do is I am going to take what could be the elements of the most important story in all of history, the history of the atonement of Christ. And so today we're going to walk through all of the elements of Scripture that talk about what Jesus did, and I want to sprinkle into there just why it's so important. Can we do that today? Let me just start with this. The atonement of Christ, without what Jesus did, none of us have any real ability to accomplish our created purpose, and we would all go to hell. So let's just start the stage with that. Even if I were to walk through a bunch of verses and just read them to you, which I won't, we'll go more in depth, and we'll talk through some of this. There's some narrative today. But if you were to sit in a classroom that talked about the atonement of Christ, it should be the most exciting story you've ever heard. Amen? Okay. We have a key scripture, Romans 5, 8, and 9. God demonstrates his own love towards us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Much more than having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through him. Those two verses right there encompass why Jesus came and what we get out of it. Now, I want to point out that the redemptive work of Christ involved quite a few things. His crucifixion, his resurrection, his ascension. He was exalted before the Father. He was glorified. He now intercedes for us at the right hand of the Father, and he's coming back. Now, I won't go through all of those in great detail today, but I did want to spend some time talking about a right understanding of what Jesus did when he was here. And here's why. Romans 10:9 says, if we confess with our mouths Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Sounds pretty simple. But what we believe and how we believe what Jesus did makes a huge impact on our salvation. There are many cults out there today that declare Jesus is Lord, but they don't have a right understanding, and so their faith does not actually believe in Jesus. They believe in something else that they call Jesus, and they have a skewed and perverted understanding of the gospel. So if we look at that rightly, then how you know Jesus is essential to your salvation. How you know him and how you relate to him, according to Romans 10:9, is the determining factor in whether we're even saved. So I come back to, could this possibly be boring? Can it? I would declare that the story of the atonement, while it may sound clinical and academic, is actually helping us to grow in Christ, because that message right there encompasses all of human history. Let's set the stage. Genesis 3. But God tells the serpent, after the fall, I will set enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And you will bruise his heel, and he will bruise or crush your head. God was declaring in that very moment a plan that had already been set in motion for Jesus to come and crush the head of Satan. That means that when God created man, he had already designed what Jesus was going to do. I talked about this at Christmas, but God's sovereignty is evident throughout Scripture, which means God is never wrong. God never failed. God never makes mistakes. So when God made man and man failed God, God did not make a mistake in creating us, but God knew that if he wanted a being, a species of people that could freely choose to worship him, then he also needed a way to overcome all the other obstacles. So here's what happens. God creates man, and he says, it is very good. It is very good. Why? Because for the first time in creation, after 6 days of creating everything else, he's now made someone in his image. That means someone with the ability to make choices. I'm going to use a little phrase here called free moral agent. It means we are free to choose right and wrong. We are free to choose whether to do right or whether to be wicked. Animals don't have that choice. We are really the only beings in the universe that have free moral agent. Why did God make us that way? Because God wanted somebody to glorify him by freely choosing him. If he made us as robots, or we could even look at the angels, without getting too much into the history, there was obviously a point where the demonic separated from the angelic beings. Satan fell like lightning, it says. He chose to rebel against God. It doesn't seem they have that choice anymore. So in terms of glorifying God by choosing to worship him and love him, we are the only beings that can do that. God wanted us to have fellowship with him, but not because we're forced to, because we want to. Those of you with children, you want your children to love you. You're not going to slap them upside the head until they say, I love you. It's probably not real. And it's not satisfying. The satisfaction that comes from us worshiping God is why God created us. He wanted us to worship him. However, God knew that in giving us that choice, the first thing man would do is choose not to. In the garden, Adam and Eve sinned. How did they sin? God gave them one instruction to not do something, and they rebelled against him. And in that moment, we're declaring that they would worship self and not God. God foresaw this. In God's sovereignty, he knew man would fall. But there was no other way to make us, because otherwise we wouldn't fulfill what he wanted us to do. And so in the moment of the fall, our entire created intent was, for all intents and purposes, destroyed. For the first time, right after creation, what God meant for man to do could no longer be done. Because when we rebelled against God, we were now cut out from the fellowship that he made us to have. And here's the real kicker. God, being perfect and holy and righteous and just, cannot have fellowship with a being that isn't going to do what he told them to do. That means we have to be destroyed. That means when God told Adam and Eve, don't do this or you'll die, he meant you'll die. Physical death came later. Spiritual death came right away. From that moment until the point of Jesus' death on the cross, mankind as a whole could not accomplish what we were meant to do. You ever heard anyone say, what am I here for? Or ask the existential questions, why do we exist? It's because they're still living in the fallen state where they don't understand that God made them for a purpose. Imagine living thousands of years through human history with no ability to actually accomplish what you were made to do. What a tragedy. And you look at the devil, he thinks he's won. He's like, I undercut everything that God meant to do with mankind. Woohoo! And so the devil over here has a kingdom that he's established on earth that he thinks is actually defeating God. Which is why understanding that God designed the atonement from the beginning of creation is so huge. The devil never won. God set Jesus' death at the perfect moment in history and just waited for the right time. So Jesus' death is a really important thing to understand. One, it was designed all the way back at creation. It wasn't a remedial plan. It wasn't God's like, what am I going to do now? These people ran away. He planned this from the beginning. Jesus died for our sins. That's the atoning death. I'm going to use a term today, and there it is, his atoning death. Jesus died for our sins. Most of us in this room know that and agree with it. But in Hebrews 2:14 it says, since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil. Remember, Satan had the power of death because he really defeated mankind. That means that from that point, Satan had been operating in the power of death. And in the moment that Jesus' death came about, he undid all that. Let's dig into this a little bit and how. Okay, God is a righteous judge. Let's establish this. Any good courtroom that you see, any good justice system that exists is based on kingdom principles. Because God is a righteous judge. That means he judges fairly. Now we said that sin, which attempts to destroy God, has to be dealt with. And the only way to truly deal with that is to destroy the offense or the offender. That means that you and I, if it weren't for Jesus, the only way we could actually atone for our own sin is to die. Even in the Old Testament, they had animal sacrifices, but those were incomplete. The blood of that animal could temporarily cover what those people had done, but it only worked for a moment, and it didn't bring salvation. All it did was give them the ability for a moment for God to look upon them. The only way that we can have an eternal fellowship with God is for an eternal, perfect blood sacrifice. Imagine standing in a courtroom. You're a criminal, and the judge says, I know what you did. There's videotape, there's evidence. There's no way around it. You are guilty, and you know you're guilty, and everyone in the room knows you're guilty. And the judge says there has to be a payment. There has to be a punishment. Because if I don't punish you, then all the other people back there who've done the same thing also can't be punished. Which means that the sin and the evil and the wickedness is then declared as good. Does that make sense? The only way for sin to actually be evil is for it to be destroyed. Otherwise, God is agreeing with the sin and allowing it to exist in his kingdom. Which means if God is a righteous judge, then your and my sin has to be dealt with the same way it will be for people who reject God. Looking at that then, there's only one possibility for us to not face our own death penalty. And that was the moment where Jesus, in this courtroom scenario, steps out and says, I'll be the mediator. Here's Satan the prosecutor saying, you guys are guilty. We know we're guilty. God the judge knows we're guilty. But instead of destroying us, Jesus steps in and says, I will take that punishment. And here's why Jesus alone could accomplish that. It says that through one man's sin, death entered the world. Sin entered the world, right? Through Adam's sin entered the whole world, which means all of us are sinful. But through one man's righteousness and his perfect obedience, salvation and righteousness was available to all men. Jesus was the only man, and it's because he was also fully God, that was able to be sinless through his entire life. And because of that, he is the only one that stood as a man that didn't already have punishment coming to him. If Jesus had had one sin in his life, he would be guilty of death, and his death then would have only atoned for himself. But as such, because Jesus was the only perfect, sinless person, his death atoned for all of us. And that's what God was doing. God was looking. God created it as a way out for us. That justice is satisfied because God declared a death and blood can atone for you, but that blood has to come from someone who's not already guilty. That's why animal sacrifices weren't perfect. The animal's not guilty of anything, but it's also not capable of having had the moral free agent and choosing to be righteous. Jesus did. And Jesus did it by the cross. Jesus says, I came to earth to die. I came down to earth to die. That means he only came with one purpose. That was to die and be resurrected. Everything he did up to that moment was just teaching people and prepping them and sharing heaven with them. But Jesus' primary intent with coming to earth was to do exactly this. Is this making sense? So what Jesus did in his atonement, it's a term called propitiation, or sometimes they call it expiation. It's the idea that someone else is taking the penalty for what you did. Keep that term in your mind, propitiation. It's a big word. It's only used in the Bible as far as I know. And there are other words that mean the same thing, but probably because very seldomly in history do we ever see someone else take the punishment. So what happens at the moment of Christ's death? I want to walk us through a little understanding here in Scripture, and you can see this in multiple Gospels. But at the moment of Christ's death, what really happened was Jesus satisfied in an instant every person's sin. Every person's sin. In John 3:16, where it says, whoever will believe, means whoever. Let's not get confused with the idea that, some people are elect to salvation and some can't find it. Everyone can find it. What happened in his death was he reversed something that had existed, where previously nobody could actually worship and fulfill their purpose. Nobody really could be saved, but God could fellowship in moments with certain people. On this side, as soon as he died, what happened was Jesus suddenly opened up the ability for us to be with God because none of our sin kept us out anymore. And now the only way you're not in the presence of God is if you choose not to be. Wow. That means people who now are not saved, it's not because they can't find God, it's because something in them is preventing them from being willing to receive and have faith. Remember, it says, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. That's pretty simple. So why are so many people unsaved? Because they don't have a right understanding of who God is. And that's why the teaching is so important. I just thank you, Tom, that he brought this to us. He really felt from God that we needed some weeks to go through the basic Bible teaching of the gospel. It's not because I think any of you are unsaved, but we could all learn and grow in him. And that's going to help solidify our faith. And when we're really solid on who we know God is, that's going to be reflected in other people. So the moment of Christ's death, sin was now unable to keep us out. Only we can keep ourselves out. The power of sin was broken, and that separation between God and man was suddenly removed. That demonstrated itself not just in the heavenly realm, but in the physical realm. That means that somewhere in Jesus' moment of death, Satan's kingdom was completely destroyed. It was conquered, right? All of its power was held in the fact that mankind was sinful. When that one element was removed, all the devil has left is the ability to deceive us individually. Whether it's through ideologies that you see in the media or personal temptations, the devil can't take an entire race to hell anymore. He takes people who choose it themselves by deceiving them. All of his power is gone. The devil only has power now when we give it to him, not because we were born into something that we couldn't control. And Jesus' death in that moment was so impactful in the heavens. You see earthquakes reflected on earth. You see darkness coming over for 3 hours. And the temple itself had a giant curtain that hung in the Holy of Holies where God's presence was. And God split it in two from top to bottom, demonstrating for all time afterwards that this curtain is no longer needed. We don't need a high priest to go in and do atoning sacrifice. You can come right in. Welcome into the presence of God. Jesus' death was a welcome mat that was laid out and said, come on in. Your sin won't keep you out. Meet me, and then I will show you who I am, and you can repent, and you can be changed. Guys, this is amazing. I think as Christians, we get kind of complacent in this and go, yeah, I know the gospel story. We do, but there's so much more for us to have revealed to us in it that will strengthen our faith. So what happened after Jesus' death? There's some history and some facts here that we're going to go through. The next part of this is his exodus. In Jesus' exodus doesn't just mean the second book of the Bible, it means departure. It was used to describe Christ's death when his spirit departed from his body for 3 days and 3 nights. This was prophesied in the book of Jonah. Jesus even said it was prophesied in the book of Jonah. Where Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a whale, so will the Son of Man spend 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Jesus' body went into a tomb. Jesus' spirit, we see some clues. Let's look at the thief on the cross, right? And there it is. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." The other one on the other side rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you were under the same sentence of condemnation?" See, this man understood something. Jesus was taking a punishment he didn't deserve. They did. And that guy said, "We indeed justly are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man's done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Wow, what an admission for someone who was guilty of death. He not only recognized that Christ was sinless, he recognized that he was the Lord. And he said, "Remember me." All it took in that moment was that declaration. And Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, today you'll be with me in paradise." A couple of really key points here. That man's salvation came from a moment of faith, just like Romans 10:9 says. He didn't have to go through a bunch of programs on how to not be weird anymore. He didn't have the opportunity. He was going to be dead in a couple hours. All it took was that man to say, "Jesus, remember me." And what did Jesus respond with? Not, "Well, you'll go to purgatory for a while and you can work it out later." No. He said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Today, you will be with me in paradise. Jesus went to the Father. Jesus went up to paradise. What else did Jesus do? Well, the moment of Jesus' death broke sin for all time, broke the power of sin, which means people in history past who had died with a faith towards God but were unable yet in those moments to already have received the salvation that Jesus offered were able to be with him. Now, there's a lot of mystery here, and there's some controversy around how, did he release them from some holding place and bring them into paradise, or how that all worked. What we do know is he led captive a host of captives and gave gifts to men. It means he led away all the people who were his, brought them into his paradise, and gave them into eternity. That means that Jesus' death wasn't just from that moment forward. It was from that moment backward and forward and all time. Which is why when I said this story covers from the beginning of creation to the end of eternity, I mean it. All of mankind was given the opportunity for salvation in Jesus' death, not just those who have died since. Not just those who have heard Jesus' story since, but those who had a faith towards God. How about guys like Abraham, who had a faith that God credited as righteousness? How about David, whom God said had a heart after him? A man after his own heart, it said. So Christ ascended to the Father. And then what happens? 3 days and 3 nights. And then on the very early part of the following week, what does he do? He resurrects. His resurrection. I'm going to read the verse first, and then I'm going to say a couple things about this. Luke 24:5-7. Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified and on the third day rise. Jesus had already told everyone what he was going to do, but they didn't believe it because that had never happened before. Can't really fault them. I mean, if you've never seen anyone rise from the dead, it's kind of hard to believe. But yet here he was. I want to make a couple points about this. Jesus didn't leave his body behind, go to heaven, and then come back in a new body. He came back into his body, the same one, but it was different. It was glorified. It was perfect. God raised him from the dead, which means his spirit went back down from heaven and into his body, and it resurrected, and it was now a glorified, eternal, perfect body. There's quite a few verses. I don't have many of them up, but where Jesus appears to people, and there's something different about him. But he's still recognizable. He tells Thomas, see the holes in my hands. For one thing, his body was missing from the tomb, so obviously he had taken it. Why is this important? When you and I die, there will come a moment where we will rise again. There is an eternal state of heaven where we will have our bodies back. There's a little theology for you guys. We will have bodies in heaven, and they will be glorified and perfect like Jesus' body. You could do an entire study on that topic right there and find it throughout Scripture. The Bible even talks about elementary teachings of Christ, such as the resurrection of the dead. We don't get taught that very much, so maybe it's something we could stand to study more. But we will be resurrected, guys. We will not be disembodied spirits playing harps on clouds with spirit fingers. We will be flesh, but somehow it will be a perfect flesh that cannot decay or die or be destroyed or commit sin. And that's only possible because Jesus rose again. Only possible because Jesus rose again. If you tell me you don't want a perfect heavenly eternal body, you're lying. Jesus' death destroyed the power of sin. Jesus' resurrection justified us to the Father and gave us a promise of an eternal body. Amen. Those two right there, that's the most important thing you'll ever hear in your life. There is nothing else that compares. There is nothing on this earth that can even come close to being as good. And people who would rather have their sin now are totally blind to what God really did. And if we can hear the Scripture with open hearts and open minds and have a better understanding, then we will worship. As Tom says, there's a verse where Jesus says, you worship that which you do not know, to the woman at the well. If we have this understanding and we grow in it, we will worship that which we know, and we will continue to know and grow in our knowledge of him. Knowledge is a good thing. We worship in spirit, but we also worship in truth. And that lack of truth can create all kinds of funny religions, guys. Jesus' death and resurrection is very, very clear in Scripture. It's very simple. It's also far more complicated than we will ever understand, because God did a mystery that our brains just quite frankly can't understand. How can a God become a flesh being and be down here with us and then do some magic that makes us now God not angry with us and then rise again into that same body and then disappear? We don't know. Maybe someday we'll get a better understanding in heaven, but we can get a better understanding now of at least what he did, and God can give us some revelation about how it really matters. Look, Jesus' resurrection, it was witnessed by the 11 disciples. It was witnessed by over 500 other people in the 40 days that he was here. Jesus did that on purpose. It even says in the book of Acts, he offered many convincing proofs, as if to indicate that a lot of people just didn't believe it. Like, yeah, you look like Jesus, you're an imposter. And there's the road to Emmaus. How about this story? You've got two people who had been part of Jesus' crowd and were just really distraught that Jesus had been crucified. Jesus shows up in their midst in his resurrected body, and it says he was veiled from them, meaning they couldn't tell that it was him. Somehow he hid his appearance from them and asked them, what's going on? And they go, aren't you you must be the only guy in all of Jerusalem that doesn't know what just happened. Literally what they said, meaning this had obviously hit the news. This was a big deal. This guy, who everyone thought had been crucified for political purposes, had really made quite a splash in the rest of the community. And they're like, you must be the only guy around here that doesn't know what happened. He goes, well, tell me, what happened? So they proceed to tell him, well, this Jesus, we thought he was going to be our Messiah and lead us into freedom, and he died. We really thought he was the one. And Jesus is like, don't you understand? Look at the prophets. Look at everything that was foretold, that of course this man had to come and die, and proceeds to spend the rest of the walk on the way to Emmaus teaching them, it says, about the prophets and the Old Testament. In other words, he spent hours with them clarifying for people who'd been with him for maybe years, who didn't understand yet what Jesus had come to do, and then sat down with them to eat dinner, and then in a moment they're like, oh my gosh, you're Jesus, and he disappears. That would have a pretty significant impact on me. If I suddenly realized that someone I'd been spending hours with who had just taught me amazing truth was like, oh, that's you. And then he's gone to the next people. So he spends 40 days after his resurrection essentially setting enough people on a trajectory where they really understand that he rose from the dead, that they would then spend the rest of their lives spreading this gospel. That leads me to think that the resurrection of Christ may be the most important part of this story. See, if Jesus had just died, then maybe we would be atoned, but there's no resurrection for us, which means it would only have managed to help us in our own lifetime. But Jesus' resurrection gave us a promise of eternity, which means that his atonement now actually impacts us for 1 billion, trillion, quadrillion years, and then some. What did Jesus' atonement actually do for us? Jesus' resurrection is super critical to our eternity. For one, I already said this, we're going to have resurrected bodies, guys. We should all be shouting, amen. That's exciting. And we're going to be with God in his presence forever. We'll get to hang out with Jesus. Come on. That's awesome. But there's many heresies about Jesus' resurrection floating around. And since I was tasked with teaching some of the history and the facts around the resurrection, I think it bears at least a mention. There are a lot of historians, some of them would call themselves theologians, but they're not, people who think that Jesus didn't really rise or didn't really die. There's one, for example, called the swoon theory. The swoon theory says Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. He just fainted from loss of blood and exhaustion. And they thought he was dead, and they were in a rush, so they just wrapped him up, stuffed him in a tomb, and after 3 days, amazingly, he revived. And he woke up, and he was like, get me out of here, and then pretended like he was God. There's another theory called mass hallucinations, where they say actually Jesus did die, he stayed in the grave, and all of his disciples were just so crazed about wanting him to be the Messiah, they self-believed this great story about him rising again, and it never really happened, and they all died defending their hallucinations. Or how about this one? The mass conspiracy. Jesus died, his disciples paid off and beat up the guards, and then took Jesus' body out of the tomb, hid it somewhere no one would ever find it, and then proceeded to proclaim to the whole world that he had risen. And historians really bank on those being true, because for some reason, they don't want Jesus to be real. For reasons I will never understand, these people are so deceived, they want to discredit what Jesus did for us. For them, they want to discredit the mediator that stepped in front of the judge and said, I'll take his punishment, and they're like, no, you're not real, go away. And they want to embrace their own death. Guys, may we never be those people. May we have such a shine of excitement from our own salvation that people like them will see us and go, wait a second, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's salvation for people just in the way that we carry our witness about what Jesus did for us. Because listen, if I know that I've been offered the greatest gift in all of history, and this guy over here is about to throw it in the trash, aren't you going to try to stop him? We're so worried about respecting everyone's beliefs that we don't tell them they're wrong. We're so worried about being politically incorrect that we stand by and kind of hide in our corner and keep our light to ourselves because, gee golly, I could get made fun of on Facebook for saying that. I don't claim to be the greatest, boldest witness on earth, but there's been many times in my life where I've realized I didn't say something out of fear, and that person's probably going to go to hell now. And that's a heavy burden to wear. It doesn't mean that you're responsible, but we do bear the responsibility to be the witness for what Jesus did for us. And again, the better we know this, the easier it is to talk about. We may have a faith to salvation, but not know much of the story, and then we can't tell it to other people. If we really know the details, I mean, even Jesus offered convincing proofs of his own resurrection. There is a time and a place where the story and the facts and the truth of it can be used to refute nonsense. Because there are a lot of people out there that really are looking for the truth, and they're so deceived by what they hear around them that they don't know what's right. And we sometimes confuse those people with the ones that are actively trying to destroy the reality of God. So Jesus, in 40 days, taught his disciples about the kingdom of God. He gave them something called the Great Commission, where he said, go into all the earth and make disciples of every nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And then, I'm going to go to this one in the book of Acts. This is one of my favorite verses. This is Acts chapter 1, verse 6. I don't have it pulled up. I do have 9 through 11, so I'm just going to read 6, 7, and 8, and then we'll jump in here. So when they had come together, the disciples, they had asked him, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? They were expecting him to do it right now. Great, you resurrected. Let's go beat up Rome and restore Israel. And he said to them, it's not for you to know the times or the seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And when he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. What an amazing sight that must have been. It just rises up off the ground and disappears behind a cloud. And they're all just staring up into the sky, trying to figure out where he went. It literally says, as they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, suddenly 2 men stood by them in white robes, angels, and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus, who was just taken up from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you saw him go. That's got some implication to it. In the same way he was taken up, he'll come back. For one thing, he rose up into the sky, he's going to come back out of the sky. Does that mean heaven's somewhere in space? Probably not. But he's going to come back. And how is he going to come back? He's going to come back with that same body he rose in. This is really, really important. Jesus is not back to some spirit being that we can't connect with. He is still fully man and fully God. He's seated at the right hand of the Father, which means there's a physical place that Jesus is seated right now as fully man. I don't understand this, but we believe it, where he is interceding for us. And Jesus is going to come back in the book of Revelation, Revelation 19. It says, riding on a white horse. He is the great, mighty commander coming back. And he has already conquered Satan's kingdom. So what's he going to do this time? He's going to clean house. There's no great battle where we're not sure who's going to win. Jesus is coming back, and he's like, all right, you're done. Clean up your toys. It's time to go. And he's going to sweep all the wickedness off. He's going to remake heaven and earth, and we're going to rise again, and we're going to be with him, and there's 1,000 years in there, and it's another story I don't have time for today. But guys, the verse that was just up there is hugely, hugely important. He's going to come back in the same way he went. We're still waiting for him. Many people will tell you, yeah, we've heard this story for a long time. He's not anywhere. He's not coming back. And it can start to feel that way when it gets really dark out there. And it seems like there's a lot of monsters. And we're not quite sure where Jesus is anymore. And the devil starts to tell us, yep, he's gone. It's all done. You might as well just go do your thing, whatever you want to do, because Jesus isn't anywhere. You know why the devil does that? Because he doesn't have carte blanche over humanity anymore. He has to deceive you into giving up your great gift. He has to deceive you into giving up your great gift and everybody else. He's got his work cut out for him. And he works really hard at it. Jesus did all the hard work. He defeated Satan already, but Satan's still wandering around as an imposter saying, wait, no, this is still my place. This is my planet. I still have control over you. No, he doesn't. He doesn't. And when we have a better understanding of who Jesus is, we're less likely to be deceived by Satan's ridiculous lies. Jesus will return the mighty, powerful King of all. Revelation 19:11. The rider on the white horse. Then I saw the heavens opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it who is called Faithful and True. That's Jesus. And in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. He has a name written that nobody knows but himself. He's clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and the name of which is called the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, in which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. You know what that means? He's not taking nonsense anymore. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh has the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Jesus is coming back with a sword in his mouth to destroy and vanquish the wickedness. Remember what we said earlier about God as the righteous judge, and he has to judge wickedness fairly? When we're under the blood of Jesus, when we live in the faith of the propitiation that he gave to us, all those other people who've rejected it and been self-deceived and hate God are going to be destroyed by their refusal to accept it. When people try to tell you that hell is some kind of unjust, mean God, we need to understand clearly it's sin that puts them in hell because of their refusal to take what was offered to them. Thomas said this before, God doesn't send you to hell, you send yourself to hell. The righteous judge is judging the wickedness. If you don't allow Jesus to cover your wickedness, you're going to go there with it. You're holding on to your baggage, and the baggage is heading off into a fire pit, and you hang on to it. What's going to happen to you? Literally, let go. That's all it takes. You let go and let Jesus cover you, and you're saved. But there are myriads of people who don't believe that, don't want it, or for some other crazy reason, hate God. And they will go to hell clinging on to their defensive, confused beliefs, their right to have what they want. We see this raging right now. People are just fighting and rioting over the demand to have their rights to do what they want. You know what? God gives them that right. But as a righteous judge, God says, you can do this, but in the day of judgment, you're gonna suffer for it. And God is patient. God is patient. But you look at this passage right here, this, again, is why Jesus' atonement is so critical. We have the opportunity to be on the right side of the kingdom of God. So in all of this, there's three things that I think we can boil down, very simplistic. Now, there's a lot more to this, but a very simplistic what Jesus' atonement did. It restored us to God. Let's just set the bar there. Jesus' atonement restored us to God. We can choose not to receive it, but it restored us to God. That means we have free access to his presence, right? He gave gifts to men. God loves you. What is this? What's another thing that I can say here? God is not angry at your sin and your failure. Because of his atonement, God's not angry at our failure. What he is he's offered us repentance in a way that nobody before could have. We are restored to our created purpose. What is our created purpose? To worship God, to choose to worship him, to love him, to glorify him. God is glorified in his people in the earth. That means that when we do what we were made to do, which is worship God, declare his great deeds in the earth, it says, he's glorified by that. Because we are contrasted with the people who chose not to. God's goodness has had an impact on us, and we're saying, no, he really is that amazing. You could preach that, and if nobody hears it, God's still glorified. There's a thought. At some level, our preaching of God's goodness isn't even just about the people. It's about declaring to the heavens who he is. And he's pleased with that. And the last thing, we are promised a resurrection. God gave us a promise of eternity. We're given a promise of a resurrection of our bodies into a glorified eternal state where we will fulfill our design forever. If you have ever felt like you don't know what you're supposed to do in this life, it's probably because you haven't met God deeply enough. If the idea of worshiping God for eternity sounds horrifically boring, it's because you haven't met him deeply enough. And here's the reality. We will always face the temptation to feel like what is in front of us is more important. And that the idea of worshiping God is just something you do on Sundays for 20 minutes when someone on a piano, and then you go home and don't do it the rest of the week. That means that for 20 minutes of the week, you're doing what you were created to do. The rest of the week, you're just surviving. Imagine having such a complete revelation on this side of heaven that worship is a great joy. Imagine also that when we are in heaven it says in James that we will then see face to face. That means the idea of faith where I believe in something I can't see doesn't exist anymore because God's right in front of us now. Jesus is right there. Being in a place where we can worship him because we see him face to face. There is no more clouding and darkness over us. Jesus' atonement will bring us to a place someday where we have an eternal ability to not only freely choose, but we'll be compelled by just how amazing God is to choose to worship him forever. And we will be fulfilled. We will be fulfilled. God will be satisfied. Everything will be perfect. Jesus' atonement is the biggest story in all of mankind. It's the biggest story in all of history. It's the biggest story in the universe. It's the most important thing you can ever talk about. And it's also simple enough that my children can understand it. Guys, only a God who's incredibly infinite could make something so vast, so non-understandable, and yet so relatable at the same time. And there really is. I challenge any of you to give me one thing that's more important than what we're hearing today. To find one thing in your life that's actually more valuable to pursue than the things of God. I would challenge any one of you to tell me what's better in this life than knowing Jesus. Because there's a lot of people out there that believe that. And they're going to hell over it. I think Tom's going to come up here in a minute, but if I could just say one thing. There's opportunity here today. If you've heard this and you don't have that faith that God raised him from the dead, or you're not sure you've really known him, today is the day of salvation. Today is the day of salvation. Tomorrow is the day of salvation. The next day. But don't delay. If you can't think of anything better to do, which you can't, and we start to understand how great he is, then let's believe him. That faith leads us to a repentance where we start to change. But here's the thing, guys. We don't have to change first. Salvation doesn't come after we've stopped being evil. Salvation comes immediately on the front end of it. That's what Jesus did. Condemnation is what the devil offers us that says, well, you better feel bad. You're not like God. Conviction is saying, actually, God's already offered this to me. And I don't want to go another moment without it. I want him. I want to be changed by him. I want to know his love. And every time when I fail, I want to come back to that because God's never angry at us anymore. God hates the wickedness. He doesn't hate you. And when we fail again, we come back and say, Lord, I'm still growing. Help me. And this is where being restored to our created purpose is so great. We're made to worship God. We're made to love him. We can do that now. There's another opportunity here, if you are saved, that we can take that relationship with God on new heights. We can come up here and worship with new understanding. We can read Scripture and have it revealed to us in new ways we've never known. And God can bring us closer. I'd like there to be an altar here. So they're going to play a little bit. And if you want to respond to God today, you want to draw near to him and you want him to meet you in new ways, let's just take a moment to respond to this. The altars are open. You can come kneel. You can stay in your seat. You can sing. You can pray. It doesn't matter. What matters is how we choose to worship God.